Hello friends, let's resume our discussion on the behavior of materials at high temperature. So in the previous lecture, we smoothly transitioned into a specific way of understanding the behavior of a material at high temperature. Now in the previous lecture, the ones before the last one, we talked in terms of general behavior or the ways to describe the general high temperature behavior of materials. And after that, we moved to specific behavior like the one that we could observe on a microscopic level or through our naked eye. And then we discussed about the mechanical change in the mechanical response of a material under an imposed condition at high temperature. So when you have load acting on a material, how with respect to temperature, the response of a material would vary with that imposed load. So these are the things that we focused on the lectures when you the lectures that preceded the last one. And in this last lecture, we transitioned and we focused our attention on a particular way of understanding the behavior of material at high temperature. We saw that when you increase the temperature or when you have a material at high temperature, the behavior of a material to an imposed mechanical condition will additionally be dependent on time. So in ambient temperature, the mechanical condition, generally when you talk about an imposed mechanical condition or when you talk about mechanical behavior of materials, it essentially depends on the load that you are imposing. However, we saw in the previous lecture that when you increase the temperature of the material, then the time or the duration for which you are applying this load will also play a critical role. The behavior of a material would also significantly vary with the duration for which you are applying this load, and we term that behavior, that is the time dependent behavior, as creep. And we justified the reasons for studying the high temperature behavior of materials in terms of creep. So in the previous lecture, we justified or we showed why one would want to focus on creep when they want to understand the high temperature behavior of materials, particularly under mechanical condition. The reason is because at high temperature, the influence of time on the behavior of the material gets more pronounced. This we arrived at by considering the velocity of dislocation. So when you consider plastic deformation, it becomes more pronounced with increase in the duration of time. And one way for us to understand that is by doing creep studies, and creep is nothing but time dependent behavior of material. Independent studies time dependent behavior of materials. Now at the end of the previous lecture, we saw that the creep is not just confined to the plastic deformation. If you could recollect, we had a plot something like this. We had the elastic strain along the y-axis and the time along the x-axis. Now we saw when you impose a load that is less than the yield strength of the material, say at T1, you impose a load that is less than the yield strength of the material. That means the load that you are imposing would just cause an elastic deformation. So at T1, let us assume that to be an ambient temperature. So at T1, at ambient temperature, you are imposing a load that is much less than the yield strength. So that means you would expect an elastic deformation immediately. At T0, you are imposing an elastic deformation, or you are imposing an elastic load, an elastic stress, and correspondingly there is an elastic strain that the material exhibits. Now when you prolong the duration, or if you hold that load constantly for a definite duration of time, say T1, at ambient temperature, there is not much change in the elastic strain exhibited by the material. Therefore, the elastic strain remains constant all through the duration during which this elastic load or the load much less than the yield strength is applied. So at ambient temperature, there is not much change in the elastic strain, and ultimately when you release the load, your material will get back to its original shape. There is not much change in the dimension, and at once this transition is at once. There is not much delay in the transition from the stretched or the elastic state to the normal state. So at ambient temperature, you are imposing an elastic load. There is an elastic strain in response to that load, and when you are holding this elastic load for a prolonged duration of time, the strain remains constant, and once you unload it, what ultimately happens is the material gets back to its original position, or rather it gets back to its original dimensions, and ultimately you end up with having the an undisturbed or reversed elastic deformation. Now we saw that when you increase the temperature to T2, when your temperature increases to T2 and you are applying the same load, and let us assume that even though the temperature increases, even though correspondingly the tensile strength will decrease, we are continuing to apply an elastic load, meaning a load that is well below the yield strength of the material. So we are again talking about the elastic region. We saw that at increased temperature, when you consider the elastic deformation, we saw at T0, once the load is imposed, there is a definite amount of elastic deformation. However, when you prolong the duration of during which you are applying this load, then there is a gradual increase in the elastic strain. You could see that for a given amount of load, just because you are holding it for a prolonged period of time, there is a gradual increase in the elastic strain that you are experiencing. The way one could know that this is an elastic strain is when you unload the sample, then you would be able to see there is a drastic decrease in the dimension. Like there is elastic behavior, there is a decrease in the dimension, but there is a remnant elastic strain at T1, the time of unloading. There is a remnant elastic strain. However, even though this elastic strain, this is an elastic strain that will gradually, or that will eventually vanish off, the rate at which this elastic strain diminishes is rather gradual. It's not abrupt as these. And this behavior we refer to as the anelastic behavior. So in anelastic behavior, what happens is that, unlike in elastic behavior, wherein once you unload the sample, the dimension gets back to its original position or gets back to its normal state. In case of, or its original state, in case of anelastic behavior, there is certain degree of elastic strain that is present at the time of unloading, and this certain degree of elastic strain vanishes off. Of course, it vanishes off, and that's the reason why we call it as elastic strain. It vanishes off, but it vanishes at a gradual rate. This we introduced in the previous lecture to show that the creep behavior is not confined to the plastic region of the mechanical deformation. It is not confined to that. It is also observed, or the similar trait is observed in the elastic region as well. If you consider, or if you define creep as a time dependent behavior of material, then the creep in the form of anelastic behavior is observed in the elastic region as well. So creep is not just confined to plastic region. Now, in the previous lecture, we did not see why such a behavior happens. Why? What is the reason that is that causes this anelastic behavior? We did not focus on it. All our focus was just confined to unraveling that the creep is also observed, or creep-like behavior is also observed in the elastic region. So in this lecture, let us begin by considering why such a behavior is observed in the crystalline materials like metals and alloy. Why should there be an elastic behavior? Now, when you consider elastic behavior, let us just have a simple setup. Let us look into the atomistic scale. So you have your two atoms here. So this would be one layer of your crystalline arrangement of atoms, and the other layer would have an atom here. So this is another layer. So to be more clear, let me just forget about the arrow. So just this is one layer of atoms, and that in the crystalline arrangement of atoms in the crystalline materials, above this layer there will be another layer of atoms. So let us assume the atoms occupy this position, and this way you have if you could recollect your atomic arrangements that you have gone through in your physical metallurgy, you have different stacking ways. You have A, B, C, A, B, and other. So A, B, C for one crystal structure, the A, B for other crystal structure. So this is close to one representation of the crystalline arrangement in, or atom arrangements in a crystalline material. So now when I impose an elastic load, so that means the atoms from its equilibrium position will move to a metastable state. So when I impose, if this is the material, and impose a tensile load, say P, the atom from position 1 will move to a position 2, which is a metastable position. And once you unload it, since this is a metastable position and the nearest stable position is its original position, it will move back to its original position, thereby causing or thereby exhibiting an elastic behavior. So you have atom in its equilibrium position, you apply a load, it will move to a metastable position which is not its equilibrium position, but it is there in that position because of the load, and once you remove the load, it will move back to its original position which was its equilibrium position, and this we can translate to the elastic behavior of materials. Now what such theory or what such behavior of materials would cause the anelastic behavior is what we want to know. Now if you consider the crystalline materials, it is not just the crystals alone that compose the material. If you have a sample that you are testing mechanically, if you have a sample or if you have a metal or an alloy that is used in an application, it is not just one crystal alone that comprise of that material. There are numerous crystals that comprise of the material. If you look into the microstructure of any applicable materials or any material that you are using in your day-to-day applications, particularly when you talk about a metal or an alloy that you are using in your day-to-day application that are highly applicable in nature. Now they are not often, of course there are electronic components that are made up of single crystals, but generally in general case these materials they comprise of more than one crystals, and when you sample it, when you polish it, and when you look into the microscope to see its microstructure, it will look something like this. Supposing it has just one face, it will look something like this, comprising of more than one crystals, and these crystals we call it as grains, and the region or the interface separating the grain we call it as grain boundaries. So these are something that you are you should be or you will be rather fairly familiar with. So the material that we are using, the material that we are often testing, that material that is put into the application, it doesn't comprise of single crystal, and that is the reason why we refer to them as polycrystalline material. We refer to them as polycrystalline material because they are made of more than one crystals, or we refer to them as grains, and they are separated by grain boundaries. So whatever crystalline structure that we see, whatever crystalline arrangement or whatever regular atoms arrangement of atoms that we see, these regular arrangement of atoms are confined to the actual crystals or grains. So let me repeat. So when you talk about metals being crystalline solids, meaning there is a long range regular arrangement of atoms. So when you talk about metals in those terms, these long range regular arrangement of atoms or the crystalline arrangement of atoms, it is confined to the region within the grains. So whatever regular arrangement of atoms you see, be it FCC, be it HCP or BCC, whatever it is, whatever regular arrangement, say this be a regular arrangement, some of you can guess what this is. So if you consider regular arrangement of atoms like this with a stacking of AB and AB, and this regular arrangement of atoms, it is confined to the grain. So what then happens at the grain boundaries? So at grain boundaries you have, even though you have two similar arrangement of atoms, you have difference in their orientation. So what then would happen is the region where these different orientations of crystals meet. So in a grain boundary is nothing but a region where crystals of similar arrangements, crystals of similar structure, but different orientations they meet. That is what we mean by grain boundary. So the grain boundary, how do we characterize it? So in case of a single phase polycrystalline system, when we talk about a single phase or monophase polycrystalline system, then the way we would characterize the grain boundary is we have crystals of identical form or structure, identical form, but different orientation meeting with each other. They are abutting each other at the grain boundaries. So the crystals of similar arrangements of atoms, they meet at but different orientation. They are inclined at different angles to a given frame of reference. They meet at the grain boundary. And now because of this interaction between crystals of two different orientations, even though they have this, they are of the same form, because of this interaction, the grain boundary is not a crystalline region. It is not a crystalline region. So in the grain boundary, there is no regular arrangement of atoms. So we saw the elastic behavior. One of the reasons for the elastic behavior of the material is because we have a well-defined equilibrium position, we have a metastable position, and since the atom, once the load is released, is capable of moving to the equilibrium position, we saw that this causes, or this can be translated to the elastic behavior. However, the reason for having an equilibrium position or the metastable position is because in the crystalline solid, at least, there is a well-defined positions of atoms in the crystal structure. However, when you talk about a region that is not crystalline in nature, supposing if you zoom in to the grain boundary and if you see, there will not be a regular crystalline arrangement of atoms, there will be a rather an irregular arrangement of atoms in the grain boundaries, the grain boundaries which we have already characterized. So, because of this irregular arrangement of atoms, once you have an irregular arrangement of atoms, then it will no longer be, because we no longer have a long range order of arrangement, so it will no longer be, you can no longer characterize that, or you can no longer represent that in the form of a unit cell. So ultimately what you would end up having is some sort of an amorphous material. So you can see that a polycrystalline material will comprise of a crystalline grain and a non-crystalline grain boundary, and this non-crystalline grain boundary is, if you can zoom into it and treat that as a separate materials, particularly if you are doing some modeling work, and if your model uses what sometimes is referred to as the diffuse interface condition, then you are very much allowed to see this interface as a separate region. So that is something in my research I deal with. In my research, I would treat the interface as a separate region, or that would be the critical region for modeling microstructural evolution. So if you think along those lines, you can of course, or if you can treat the interface as a separate, made up of a separate material. That's just taking a detour here just to give you a justification why one can treat the interface or the grain boundary as a separate material. It is being done, and it is being done as in one of the quite well-known numerical tool called phase field approach. In that phase field approach, we treat the interface separately from that of the actual grains. Just a detour. So when you think about the grain boundary and treat that because of its nature in which the atoms are arranged in it, you can consider that to be an amorphous material when you compare that to the adjacent grain, which is purely crystalline in nature. Now, when you apply load to the amorphous material, or say any material is close to glass or amorphous material, the way it would behave when you compare that to when you compare to that of the crystals, it will be significantly different. You are applying a load to two different materials, one is crystalline and the other is amorphous, the behavior will be significantly different. Now this behavior becomes more pronounced when you increase the temperature of the materials, particularly the behavior of the amorphous materials. They behave in a different manner when you increase the temperature of the material, because they behave like a viscous region, or rather they behave like a viscous material at high temperature. So you have an amorphous material, you raise the temperature of that material and you impose a mechanical loading condition or impose a load to that material. The behavior of that material will be different, significantly different from its behavior at ambient temperature, and now at high temperature it begins to they begin to behave, this amorphous material, they begin to behave like a viscous material. They would expand in a way like a semi-solid material would expand, and they contract in a way a semi-solid material would contract, meaning there will be a lapse in the extension of the material, and also there will be a lapse in the contraction of the material or the resumption of the material to its original form. So now when you put these two together, when you have a polycrystalline material that is comprised of grains and grain boundaries, and the grain boundary as opposed to grains, or in contrast to grains, in the grain boundaries the atoms do not have a definite position, they do not have a crystal structure, they behave like an amorphous material. Then when you increase the temperature and apply a tensile loading, for example, then the way these grain boundaries or the atoms at this grain boundary behave will be different from that of the way the atoms at the crystal or the grains would behave. So because of these difference in the behavior of the atoms at the grain boundaries and at the crystals, this is the reason for, or this difference in the behavior of the atoms is responsible for the anelastic behavior that we see. So to put it simply, we can view the polycrystalline materials as the combination of crystal and amorphous materials. At high temperature, the amorphous materials, that is the grain boundary, the atoms and the grain boundary will behave differently to that of the actual crystals, and this difference in the behavior or this viscous behavior of the grain boundaries or the atoms and the grain boundary is responsible for the anelastic behavior. Now the question is, would or will we be able to see the anelastic behavior in single crystals? Will single crystals reflect the anelastic behavior? This is something for you to think about. The straightforward answer is, if you have a single crystal with regular crystal structure, the crystal structure that is well known to us, say HCP, BCC and FCC, where the atoms have a definite position, there the anelastic behavior will be rather minimal. However, there are other crystal structures. So the one question you can ask yourself is, if you have a single crystal, will this anelastic behavior be as pronounced as the polycrystalline material, given that it is the grain boundaries or it is the atoms, arrangements of the atoms at the grain boundaries that are responsible for the anelastic behavior? Will we be able to see such a behavior in the single crystals? So that is for you to think about. Now let us move on. I would very much like to give a pause here, so let me give a pause. So let this be a two-part video or two-part lecture. So let me give a pause here. So this is, in this part of this lecture, what we have so far seen is just a theoretical reasoning for or theoretical underpinning of why we see an anelastic behavior and what is the reason behind the anelastic behavior at high temperature. So in the subsequent lecture, we will resume with our discussion on creep in the plastic, or we will resume our discussion on focus largely on the creep, and we will introduce ourselves to the study of creep and how we will be approaching, how we will approach to understand the creep behavior of the material. So let this be the part 1 of the lecture, and we will resume ourselves in the part 2 of this lecture. Thank you. Bye.